Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm going to share a deeply personal and painful story about how I discovered my wife's secret affair with her coworker, which ultimately led to the collapse of our marriage. Stick around, because this is a story you won't believe. The moment I saw that text, I knew something was up. Chris, some dude from her office. The message seemed harmless enough, but you don't get that twist in your gut over nothing. Sarah, always glued to her phone lately, was humming a different tune, and it wasn't for me. I'd ask about her day, and she'd just shrug, her mind obviously miles away. It wasn't like her, not the Sarah I married. I remember sitting across from her at breakfast, watching her smile at her phone. That smile used to be mine. Who's Chris? I asked casually, trying not to let my suspicion show. Oh, just a colleague. She brushed it off, but her voice had this high pitch it gets when she's not quite on the level. It started eating at me, you know? I'd lie awake, her texts pinging all night. She thought I didn't notice. But I did. I noticed everything. The way she'd light up when she typed, the quick screen switches when I walked past. Once, I caught a glimpse of her phone, messages pouring in from Chris. Can't wait to see you, one read. My heart sank. I had to confront her. I couldn't just sit there playing the clueless husband. So, one night, as she slipped into the shower, I asked straight up about Chris. Her reaction was a telltale sign. Defensive. A bit too quick to deny anything was going on. He's just a friend from work, John. You're being paranoid. But her eyes, they didn't match her words. The more she denied it, the more obsessed I became. I couldn't shake off the feeling that she was drifting away from me, getting sucked into this world where I didn't exist. Sarah, my Sarah, who used to find any excuse to spend time together, was now always busy, always tired, always preoccupied with her phone. I started to question everything. Our late night talks, our weekend plans, our simple moments of laughter, they all seemed to fade into the background. It was like living with a stranger who wore my wife's face. The woman I loved, who shared my dreams, my bed, was sharing parts of herself with someone else. And the worst part? I was losing her, bit by bit, text by text. The thought kept me up at night, this nagging suspicion that turned into a silent scream in my head. It wasn't just about the texts anymore. It was about us, what we were, what we'd become. I lay there, next to her, feeling miles apart, wondering if every "I love you" was just a placeholder for something or someone else. That's how it all started. A simple text spiraling into a whirlpool of doubt and secrecy. And there I was, right in the middle, trying to hold on to the remnants of a marriage that was slipping through my fingers like sand. I had this nagging feeling, right? Something was off. Sarah, my wife, always had her phone with her, clutching it like some lifeline. At first, I tried to brush it off, but man, it was like a splinter in my brain. So, I started checking her phone. Yeah, I know, not the coolest move, but I had to know. Every time I grabbed her phone, it was clean. Too clean. It was like she was one step ahead, always erasing any trace of whatever it was. That's when I knew for sure something was up. She was up to something, and it wasn't good. Then one day, it hit me. She had this new app, looked like a regular calculator or something. But when I tried to use it, it asked for a password. Bingo. A secret app for messaging. Clever, Sarah. Really clever. But why? Why all the secrecy? I felt like I was in some sort of spy movie, except it was my life unraveling on screen. And Chris, this guy from her office, he was suddenly everywhere. Well, not physically, but in every whispered phone call, every time she laughed at her screen. I asked her about him once, and she just shrugged it off. But I could tell something was going on between them. I remember this one time, she said she was going out for lunch with her colleagues. But later, I found a receipt in her purse. Just for two, Sarah and Chris had their secret lunch, a cozy little rendezvous. The thought of it made my blood boil. She was slipping away from me, and all I could do was watch. At home, things were getting tense. I couldn't look at her without wondering what she was hiding. Every smile she gave me felt fake. I started to pull back, building this wall between us. I didn't want to, but the anger, the hurt, it was too much. And it got worse. They started meeting after work. Sarah, who used to rush home to spend time together, was now always working late. It was like a punch in the gut every time she said it. I knew she was with him, laughing, sharing moments that were supposed to be ours. I tried to confront her a few times, but she was a master at dodging questions. Always had an excuse, always ready to turn the tables on me. "Why don't you trust me, John?" She'd say. Trust? How could I? With every secret meeting, every hidden message, trust was the last thing I could offer. It was like living with a ghost. She was there, but not really. We shared a house, a bed, but we were worlds apart. And in her world, I was the outsider, desperately trying to claw my way back in. Every day, I watched her drift further away, into a life where I didn't exist. And every day, I lost a little more of the woman I loved. It was a slow, painful realization that I was fighting a battle I had already lost. That night, the suspicion was eating me alive. I had to know. So I followed Sarah. Yeah, that's right, me, lurking in the shadows like some detective from a cheap novel. But what I saw, or rather, what I almost saw, was enough to confirm my fears. There she was, sneaking around, looking over her shoulder. She was meeting him, Chris. I was just a shadow away from catching them red-handed. But she slipped away, just barely. It scared her, I could tell. The next few days, she was jumpy, like a cat on a hot tin roof. But she didn't stop. No, Sarah didn't stop seeing Chris. It was like she was addicted to whatever they had, and nothing, not even the risk of getting caught, could make her quit. So, I did something crazy. I planned a surprise weekend trip for us. A desperate attempt to rekindle whatever was left of our marriage. I took her to this cozy little cabin in the woods, the kind of place we used to love. It was beautiful, peaceful, the perfect setting to remind her of us. But the whole time, she was distant. It was like I was there with a stranger who looked like my wife. I tried everything: romantic dinners, long walks, talking late into the night. But she was miles away, lost in thoughts that clearly didn't include me. Every attempt I made to bridge the gap between us felt like it was just widening the chasm. And then we got back. Back to reality. Back to the mess. And it got messier. She found out that Chris, Mr. Perfect, was seeing someone else. I saw it in her eyes, the hurt, the betrayal. But it wasn't me she felt betrayed by. It was him. That stung more than I can say. In a way, I was glad she found out. I thought maybe this would be a wake-up call, a chance for us to start over. But things don't always work out the way you hope. She was hurt, yes, but not enough to turn back to me. Not enough to undo everything that had happened. I watched her struggle with it, torn between anger and longing. And all I could do was stand by, helpless, as she grappled with the reality of her affair. The woman I loved, caught in a web of lies and deceit she had spun herself, was now facing the consequences. And I, the bystander in my own marriage, could only watch as the drama unfolded. When suspicion creeps in, it festers like a bad wound. That's what happened to me. I couldn't shake off the feeling that Sarah was still seeing Chris, even after our weekend getaway. So, I started digging a bit deeper, checking her credit card bills. Call it a hunch, but something was definitely off. The bills were too clean, almost like she was covering her tracks. And I was right. Sarah had switched tactics. She was using cash now for her meetups with Chris. Smart move, but not smart enough. I knew her too well. Knew that her sudden need for cash wasn't for some innocent shopping sprees. The pieces were falling into place, and they weren't painting a pretty picture. Their affair, it was getting more daring, more reckless. I heard bits and pieces, caught whispers of their secret meetings. They were no longer content with just texts and lunch breaks. No, they were meeting in places that spelled danger in big, bold letters. It was like they were addicted to the thrill, the risk of getting caught. But what they didn't know was that I was onto them. I couldn't just sit back and watch my marriage crumble into dust. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Yeah, it sounds extreme, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I gave the pie all the info he needed. Follow her, track her movements, Find out what she's up to, I told him. It felt surreal, like I was a character in some gritty detective movie. But this was my life, and I needed answers. The investigator got to work, blending into the background, unseen, unnoticed. Sarah had no clue that her every move was being watched, documented. And me? I was waiting, bracing myself for the inevitable storm that was about to hit. Every day, the investigator would update me. Locations, times, sneaky rendezvous, the whole sordid affair laid bare. And every detail was like a knife, twisting deeper into my heart. The woman I loved, the woman I shared my life with, was living a double life. And the worst part? I was the outsider, the fool left in the dark. But not anymore. Now I had the upper hand. I had proof, cold, hard evidence of her betrayal. It was only a matter of time before I confronted her, before I brought the whole charade crashing down. And as I waited for that moment, a part of me mourned the loss of the life I thought we had, the future we were supposed to share. It was all slipping away, piece by painful piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The moment Sarah told me about her sudden work conference, I knew it was a lie. Call it intuition or just knowing your partner too well, but I could tell she was up to something. And when Chris suggested a weekend getaway around the same time, the pieces clicked. It wasn't rocket science to figure out what was really going on. I felt a mix of anger and sadness, but I kept my cool. Have a good trip, I told her, my voice steady, hiding the storm inside. The minute she left, I called the private investigator. She's going on a trip this weekend. I want to know everything, I said. It was a point of no return. The investigator did his job well. He followed Sarah discreetly, capturing photos of her and Chris together. Every picture was a blow to my heart, a visual confirmation of her betrayal. It was happening, right in front of my eyes, yet miles away. Meanwhile, at the getaway, things were escalating between Sarah and Chris. I didn't need the investigator to tell me that. I knew Sarah. This wasn't just a fling for her anymore. She was in deep, maybe even considering leaving me for him. The thought alone was like a cold hand squeezing my heart. But nothing prepared me for when the investigator reported back with all the evidence. The photos, the details of their intimate moments, it was all laid out in front of me, undeniable and raw. Seeing Sarah with another man, talking about a future together, it tore me apart. I felt a mix of grief and rage, a sense of loss so profound it was suffocating. There she was, the woman I had vowed to spend my life with, planning a life with someone else. It was more than just an affair now, it was a betrayal of everything we had built together. I sat there, looking at those photos, and it felt like I was watching my marriage crumble into dust. It's one thing to suspect your spouse of cheating, quite another to have it confirmed with such brutal clarity. I was devastated, lost in a whirl of emotions I couldn't fully comprehend. How had it come to this? How had we gone from loving spouses to this twisted, painful mess? I had to face the truth, as bitter as it was. Sarah wasn't the person I thought I knew. She had changed, or maybe she had always been this way, and I just refused to see it. Either way, our marriage was on its last legs, and there was no going back from here. It was a defining moment, a crossroads. I knew I had to confront her, to bring everything out into the open. But part of me dreaded that confrontation. It wasn't just about exposing her lies, it was about admitting to myself that our marriage, our life together, was probably over. And that realization was the hardest pill to swallow. The day I confronted Sarah, it felt like I was walking through a nightmare. I had the photos, the reports, all the evidence of her affair right in my hands. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. She looked at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. I laid it all out, the photos, the investigator's findings. It was undeniable, yet she denied everything. It's not what it looks like, she said, but we both knew it was exactly what it looked like. Her words were like hollow echoes, bouncing off the walls of our once happy home. Meanwhile, Chris, the other guy in this mess, was losing his nerve. He wanted to lay low, avoid getting caught any further. Sarah told me about it later, how he was panicking, scared of the consequences. Funny, how brave people can be until they're facing the music. In the midst of this storm, I did something unexpected. I suggested renewing our vows. Maybe it was a desperate attempt to salvage what was left of our marriage, or maybe I just needed to know if there was anything worth saving. Sarah was taken aback, her guilt and conflict written all over her face. But her mind was elsewhere, with Chris. She had made up her mind to leave me for him. My wife, the woman I had shared my life with, was ready to walk away. It was a tough pill to swallow, knowing that I was fighting a losing battle. Before she could break the news to me, I planned a surprise vow renewal ceremony. I wanted to remind her of the love we once shared, of the promises we made to each other. It was a grand gesture, a last-ditch effort to win her back. The day of the ceremony, I watched her walk towards me, a mix of emotions on her face. There was love, yes, but also guilt, sadness, and a hint of resignation. We stood there, in front of our friends and family, about to renew vows that felt like they were hanging by a thread. It was a surreal moment, both of us caught in a web of lies and half-truths, trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. I wanted to believe that we could start over, that we could rebuild our relationship. But deep down, I knew it was a fantasy, a fleeting dream that was about to be shattered by the harsh light of reality. As we exchanged vows, I looked into Sarah's eyes, searching for a sign, any sign, that we could make it through this. But all I saw was a woman torn between two worlds, struggling to choose between the life she had and the life she wanted. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what I did, I might have already lost her. Standing there during the vow renewal ceremony, saying words that felt like ash in my mouth, I couldn't shake the feeling of being a complete fraud. Sarah's eyes, usually so full of life, were clouded with a mixture of guilt and detachment. It was like we were actors in a play, performing our roles for an audience that believed in a love story that no longer existed. After the ceremony, the facade crumbled. Sarah, with a voice that trembled despite her resolve, told me she wanted a divorce. It was a blow, sure, but not unexpected. The pain, though, was real and sharp, like a physical wound. It was the end of a chapter, the end of us. But the twists in this tale weren't over. After Sarah told Chris about the divorce, he began to distance himself. It struck me as odd, wasn't this what he wanted? Or so I thought. Sarah was confused, hurt by his sudden coldness. It was like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. Then came the bombshell that turned everything on its head. Chris, the other man, was actually a private investigator. I had hired him to find out the truth about Sarah, but never in my wildest dreams did I imagine this outcome. It was a game of deception, and we were all pawns. When Sarah found out, her world fell apart. She had been played, her emotions manipulated in a game she didn't even know she was part of. The realization hit her hard. The man she thought she loved, the future she envisioned, it was all a carefully orchestrated lie. For me, it was a mix of vindication and sorrow. Yes, I had my answers, but at what cost? Our marriage, once built on love and trust, was now a pile of rubble, destroyed by lies and deceit. And in the midst of this wreckage was Sarah, a woman I once thought I knew, now a stranger, her world crumbling around her. It was a bitter victory, if it could be called a victory at all. The truth had come out, but it left destruction in its wake. As I watched Sarah grappling with the reality of her situation, I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. Yes, she had betrayed me, but the web of lies I had woven was no less deceitful. In this twisted game, there were no winners, only broken hearts and shattered illusions. We were all casualties of a war we didn't know we were fighting. And as the dust settled, the only thing left was the cold, hard truth, lying bare and unadorned, a testament to the wreckage of what once was. The day I served Sarah the divorce papers, it felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I had all the evidence I needed, neatly compiled, a testament to the betrayal and lies. It was a hard thing to do, but it was necessary. There was no going back from here. The divorce process was messy, to say the least. It was a tangle of legal battles, emotional confrontations, and a constant reminder of the life we were tearing apart. Sarah was losing much in the process, our shared assets, the comfortable life we had built together. It was a steep price for her actions, and it pained me to see it, even though I knew it was the consequence of her choices. Then, Chris, the guy she thought she loved, the private investigator I had hired, vanished into thin air. And with him, a significant chunk of Sarah's savings. It was the ultimate betrayal for her, a cruel twist in an already painful saga. She was left reeling, not only emotionally, but now financially as well. Alone, with her world crumbling around her, Sarah faced not just the financial ruin but also the public humiliation. Our once private life was now fodder for gossip, the details of our messy divorce spreading like wildfire. She had to bear the weight of judgmental stares, whispered rumors, and the harsh reality of her actions coming to light. At work, where she once held a position of respect, the rumors started to spread. Colleagues who used to greet her with smiles now offered her nothing but cold shoulders and pitiful glances. It was a harsh fall from grace, and I knew it was taking its toll on her. I watched from a distance, torn between anger and a residual sense of protectiveness. This was not the ending I had envisioned for us when we first set our vows. We were supposed to grow old together, not tear each other apart in a whirlwind of deceit and revenge. The sadness of it all was overwhelming. Here we were, two people who once promised to love and cherish each other, now embroiled in a bitter battle, leaving scars that would likely never heal. The love that once bound us together had been replaced by hurt and resentment, a painful reminder of what we had lost. As the divorce proceedings dragged on, it became clear that the life we had built was dissolving before our eyes. It was a sobering realization, one that came with its share of regrets and what-ifs. But the path we had chosen was irreversible, and all that was left was to move forward, each of us carrying the weight of our broken past. When the scandal hit, it was like a domino effect. First, I lost my job. The company I'd given years to, the career I had built from the ground up, gone in the blink of an eye. They said it was because of the scandal, the bad press. I knew it was more than that. It was the betrayal, the lies. It didn't matter that I was good at my job. All that mattered was the story. Then came the isolation. Friends who used to call every week, who I thought would stand by me through thick and thin, started distancing themselves. Invitations dried up, calls went unanswered. I was becoming an outcast, a pariah. The whispers and sideways glances were everywhere I went. It was a loneliness I had never known, a solitude imposed by the world. The divorce was a landslide defeat. John, my husband, got everything. The house, the car, most of our shared assets. I was left with nothing, a shell of the life we had built together. It was a harsh reality to face, sitting in a half-empty apartment, surrounded by the remnants of a life that no longer existed. In desperation, I tried to reach out to Chris, the man I thought I loved, the man who had been nothing but a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. But he was gone, vanished without a trace. No answers, no closure, just a gaping void where he once was. It was a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that I had been nothing more than a mark in his investigation. And then, as if things couldn't get any worse, the legal trouble started. I was facing charges for fraud and deception, a consequence of the tangled web of lies that had enveloped my life. The court dates, the lawyers, the endless paperwork, it was overwhelming. Every step into that courtroom was a reminder of how far I had fallen, of the mistakes I had made. It was a downward spiral, a fall from grace that seemed to have no end. Each day brought a new challenge, a new reminder of the mess I had made of my life. The scandal had taken everything from me, my job, my friends, my marriage. And now, it threatened to take my freedom too. As I sat alone in that apartment, facing the consequences of my actions, I couldn't help but reflect on the choices I had made. The lies, the affair, the destruction of my marriage, it all seemed so senseless now. I was paying the price for my mistakes, a price that seemed too steep to bear. But there was no turning back. The past couldn't be undone, the damage couldn't be repaired. All I could do was face the future, however bleak it seemed. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and hardships. But it was a journey I had to take, a path I had to walk alone. Selling my stuff just to scrape by wasn't something I ever thought I'd have to do. There I was, a grown man, hawking my belongings like it was a yard sale. Each item sold felt like a piece of me was being chipped away. My guitar, the one I used to play for Sarah on lazy Sunday afternoons, gone. The watch my dad left me, gone. It was like erasing parts of my life, just to keep the lights on. Meanwhile, Sarah was sinking even deeper. She was living in this tiny, run-down apartment, a far cry from the comfortable life we once shared. I heard about it through the grapevine. Part of me felt sorry for her, but another part, the hurt part, thought it was just desserts. As for me, I was trying to move on. I started seeing someone new, a lovely woman who knew nothing of my past troubles. We were out there, just living life, unburdened by the shadows of my failed marriage. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting to know that Sarah was out there, alone and struggling. Then came the final twist, the one that knocked the wind out of me. I found out that Chris, the guy Sarah had an affair with, wasn't on it with me from the start. He was a private investigator I'd hired to catch her cheating. When Sarah found out, it was like the world dropped out from under her. It was a cruel revelation, one that made the whole sordid affair even more twisted. Sitting in my now sparsely furnished apartment, I couldn't shake off the guilt. Yes, Sarah had betrayed me, but the lengths I went to expose her, it didn't sit right. I had my revenge, but at what cost? There was no satisfaction, no sense of victory, just a hollow feeling where my heart used to be. I thought about Sarah, alone in her dingy apartment, her life in tatters. I wondered if she regretted everything, if she ever thought about what we had, what we could have had. As for me, I was left with a new life, but one that was built on the ruins of the old. Moving on wasn't just about finding someone new, it was about living with the choices I'd made, the actions I'd taken. The story of me and Sarah, it ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. Two people, once so in love, now just two separate tales of caution and regret. I sat there, in my near-empty living room, the silence a stark reminder of everything that had gone wrong. It was a dramatic end, sure, but not a happy one. Just a man, his memories, and the cold truth of his own making. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you found this story compelling, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of my future videos. Also, let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced anything similar. Take care. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm diving into the raw, unfiltered story of how my seemingly perfect marriage crumbled after discovering my wife's affair and the tumultuous journey of rebuilding my life from the ground up. You know, they say life's a party. But what they don't tell you is sometimes the music stops, the lights come on, and you're left staring at a mess. That was me, standing amidst the wreckage of what I thought was a happy marriage. Our 10th anniversary bash was the epitome of perfection, a lavish affair where laughter flowed as freely as the champagne. My wife, Julia, was the belle of the ball, her smile as bright as the diamonds I'd gifted her. I was on top of the world, a self-made man who just clinched a deal that was the cherry on top of my already thriving business. Life was good, or so I thought. But soon after, things started to change. Julia, once the anchor of my hectic life, became distant. Her presence at home dwindled. Work meetings and girls' nights filled her calendar. I tried to brush it off as a phase. After all, we were both busy adults, right? Then came the day that turned my doubts into cold, hard reality. I stumbled upon her phone, buzzing with a new message. Curiosity, they say, killed the cat. In my case, it shattered my world. The texts I saw were not just friendly, they were intimate, laced with a familiarity that twisted my gut into knots. They were from some guy named Mark, a name I'd never heard before. Confronting Julia was like igniting a powder keg. She denied everything, her words sharp and accusing. I was being paranoid, she claimed, suffocating her with my insecurities. But the trust between us had cracked, and I couldn't just let it go. So, I did what any desperate, cornered husband would do. I hired a private investigator. It felt like a betrayal, a sordid step into a world I never thought I'd enter. Yet, I needed the truth, no matter how ugly it might turn out to be. As days turned into weeks, the pie fed me bits and pieces of Julia's secret life. Each report, each photograph was a hammer blow to the life I'd built. It wasn't just texts anymore. There were dinners, late-night rendezvous, and that look in her eyes that I thought was reserved only for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a man who prided himself on making smart, calculated decisions, completely blindsided in the most personal aspect of his life. I thought I knew her. I thought we were happy. But as the evidence piled up, I had to face the harsh truth. The woman I loved, the woman I'd built a life with, was a stranger. The day I got those photos from the pie was the day my world stopped spinning. There they were, glossy, undeniable proof of Julia's affair. Seeing her with another man was like a punch to the gut. I sat there, in my office, the pictures spread out on my desk like some grotesque collage, each one a betrayal. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what came next. I was at work, right in the middle of a meeting when I got served. Divorce papers, in front of my entire team. The look of pity in their eyes was almost as painful as the contents of those papers. Julia was going for the jugular, not just half of our assets, but full custody of our kids, too. It felt like I was in some twisted nightmare. I moved out of our family home, our sanctuary of over a decade, and into a cramped apartment that echoed with the silence of my new reality. The walls were bare, the rooms filled with the ghosts of my former life. Adjusting was an understatement. I was sleepwalking through a life I didn't recognize. Then came the divorce proceedings. You see, in our society, divorce isn't just between two people. It's a spectacle, and ours was no exception. Accusations flew, dirty laundry was aired, and whatever shred of privacy or dignity I had left was trampled under the public's watchful eye. I'd become that guy, the one people whispered about in the corridors. The worst part? The affair went public. Julia's once pristine social image was now tainted. The same society that once adored her, now shunned her. The irony of it was cold comfort to me. I had wanted justice, sure, but watching her fall from grace wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. It was just sad, a grim reminder of how far we'd fallen. The days blurred into one another, each bringing its own set of challenges. I was fighting a battle on all fronts, personal, professional, legal. But in this whirlwind of chaos, there was a strange sense of clarity. It was as if the storm had stripped away all the pretenses, leaving me with nothing but the raw truth of my situation. And somewhere in that truth, I began to find the strength to rebuild, piece by painstaking piece. You'd think that after a scandal like mine, the worst thing would be the heartbreak or the loneliness. But no, it was watching the empire I built from scratch crumble before my eyes. Clients I'd worked with for years, clients I'd called friends, vanished. Each email saying, "We're moving in a different direction," was a nail in the coffin of my once thriving business. The divorce wasn't just taking my marriage, it was taking my life's work. Just when I thought I'd hit rock bottom, Mike, an old college buddy, called me up. "I've got a proposition for you," he said. He'd been following my saga, and instead of turning away, he was reaching out. Mike had this crazy idea for a tech startup, something about revolutionizing the ways small businesses handle online marketing. It was risky, completely out of my comfort zone, but what did I have to lose? So I dove in. I poured every ounce of energy into this new venture. The long nights, the endless research, the constant pitching to skeptical investors. It was exhausting but exhilarating. There's something about building something from nothing that reignites a fire in you, a fire I thought Julia had extinguished. Slowly but surely, we started to gain traction. Our small team was like a family, each of us driven by our own reasons, united by the common goal of proving ourselves. We landed our first major client, then another, and then another. It was more than just a business succeeding, it was my comeback story. Meanwhile, karma was having its way with Julia. Her lover, the man she wrecked our family for, walked out on her, cited the scandal and her manipulative ways as his reasons. Part of me felt vindicated, sure, But another part, a part one didn't want to acknowledge, felt sorry for her. She was reaping what she'd sown, but the sight of someone you once loved hitting rock bottom is never pleasant. The success of the new venture was about more than just financial gain. It was a testament to resilience, a middle finger to every doubter, every whisper behind my back, every pitiful look I'd received in the past months. I wasn't just rebuilding my business, I was rebuilding myself. Sometimes, life gives you a second chance, but not in the way you expect. The day I won that court case over our shared vacation home, it wasn't just about the property. It was a symbol, a sign that maybe, just maybe, the tides were turning in my favor. It was a minor victory, but it felt like a watershed moment in the never-ending storm of my divorce. Around the same time, Julia's life seemed to be unraveling at the seams. Her financial woes were the talk of the town, quite the fall from grace for someone who once prided herself on her social status. Her so-called friends started distancing themselves, as if her misfortune was contagious. I won't lie, part of me felt a grim satisfaction seeing her get a taste of her own medicine. But life had more in store for me. My new business, which started as a desperate shot in the dark, landed a deal that was nothing short of a miracle. We secured a contract with one of the biggest names in the industry, catapulting us back into the limelight. From the ashes of my old life, I was rising, stronger and more determined than ever. Then, out of the blue, Julia reached out. She wanted to talk, to sort things out. Mistakes, misunderstandings, the words tasted bitter. I'd moved past the anger, but the scars were still there, raw and tender. I met her, yes, but the man she faced that day was no longer the one she left. I listened, more out of curiosity than anything else. Her pleas, once capable of swaying me, now fell on deaf ears. My focus was my children, my business, not the remnants of a love turned sour. It was a surreal experience, watching the woman who once held my heart now grasping at straws, trying to claw her way back into a life she'd willingly thrown away. But the bridges were burned, and I was not about to rebuild them for her to cross again. The fallout from her choices wasn't just legal or financial, it was social suicide. The same people who once flocked around her were now nowhere to be seen. She was left to face the consequences alone, ostracized from the world she once ruled. This chapter of my life wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about learning, growing, and accepting that some things, once broken, can never be put back together. It was a hard lesson, learned through tears and turmoil, but it was mine, and it had shaped me into who I was becoming. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. There's something about hitting rock bottom. It strips away all the pretenses, all the noise, and leaves you with what's truly important. For me, that was my kids. The day they told me they wanted to stay with me, not just for a weekend or a holiday, but for good, that was the day I knew I'd done something right amidst all the chaos. Their choice spoke volumes, more than any court ruling ever could. It was a bittersweet victory, though. They were seeking refuge from the storm their mother had created, and as much as I welcomed them with open arms, it pained me to see them caught in the crossfire of our broken marriage. Business-wise, things were looking up. We launched a product that was the first of its kind in the market, a real game changer. The buzz it created was unreal. We were not just back in business, we were making headlines. It felt like a vindication of all the late nights, the doubts, the risks. This success was more than financial. It was a testament to what you can achieve when you refuse to give up, no matter how many times life knocks you down. Meanwhile, Julia's world seemed to be crumbling faster than ever. The legal fees from our never-ending divorce battle were piling up, and her lavish lifestyle was no longer sustainable. I heard through the grapevine that she had started selling off her jewelry, designer clothes, remnants of a life she could no longer afford. It was a stark contrast to the life she'd chosen over our family. During this time, I met someone. Sarah was her name. Meeting her was like a breath of fresh air. She was everything Julia wasn't: kind, genuine, grounded. She didn't care about my money or my past. She saw me, the real me, not the tabloid version or the successful entrepreneur. We started dating, taking it slow. The kids liked her, which was all I could ask for. She brought a sense of normalcy, a sense of peace that had been missing from my life for far too long. Julia, on the other hand, was forced to downsize. The luxurious house we once called a home was no longer hers. Last I heard, she'd moved into a modest apartment, a far cry from the opulence she was accustomed to. Part of me felt sorry for her. We'd shared a life, after all. But another part, the part that had been betrayed and dragged through the mud, couldn't help but think it was a fitting outcome for the choices she'd made. Life's funny, you know? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball. But sometimes, those curveballs can lead to a home run. That's what happened when Sarah entered our lives. The kids took to her like fish to water. There was laughter in the house again, real laughter. We'd sit around the dinner table, sharing stories, making plans. It felt like a family, a real family. Sarah had this way of making things feel normal, even when the world outside was anything but. But while we were finding our peace, Julia's world was falling apart. Social media can be brutal, and she was getting the brunt of it. The backlash was fierce. I'd see the comments, the judgments passed by strangers. It was a public shaming of the worst kind. I won't lie. Part of me thought she deserved it, but another part, maybe the fatherly part, felt bad. I knew the impact it was having on her mental health. It's one thing to face consequences, but another to be torn apart by the faceless masses. In the midst of all this, my business was thriving. We were making waves, and people were taking notice. I was awarded for my entrepreneurial spirit, for making a comeback against all odds. Standing there, accepting that award, I looked out and realized how far I'd come. From the depths of despair to a moment of triumph, it was a journey I'd never forget. It was more than an award. It was a validation of my resilience, my refusal to be kept down. The fallout from the scandal was reaching far and wide, and it hit Julia hard when her own parents turned their backs on her. They were traditional, the kind who viewed family and reputation above all else. They couldn't stomach what she'd done, the scandal she'd caused. It was a harsh blow, losing her family over choices she'd made. I felt for the kids. They were caught in the middle of this familial rift, through no fault of their own. As for us, we were moving up, quite literally. I bought a new house, a place where we could start fresh. It was spacious, with a big backyard for the kids, a place where they could grow, where we could make new memories. It was a symbol of our new beginning, a testament to the life we were building together. The day we moved in, I stood at the doorway, watching the kids run around, exploring every nook and cranny, Sarah organizing the kitchen, her laughter mingling with theirs. It felt right, it felt like home. Life's like a road, full of twists and turns. My road was veering towards a sunny horizon while Julia seemed to be stuck in a never-ending storm. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to start her own business, a boutique or something. But it tanked hard. No support, no connections, she'd burned too many bridges. I couldn't help but think it was a grim reminder of how alone she'd made herself. Meanwhile, our kids were thriving. Jack nailed every baseball game, and Lily, my little math whiz, was acing her classes. They'd come home with trophies and certificates, their faces beaming with pride. "Thanks, Dad," they'd say, "for always being there." Those words, let me tell you, they meant everything. It was proof that despite the mess, I was doing something right for them. The news about Julia's health hit me unexpectedly. Stress, loneliness, it was all taking its toll. I saw her once during this time, and the change was stark. The vibrant woman I once knew was now just a shadow, frail and hollow-eyed. Our marriage was long over, but it was hard to see her like that. The mother of my children. Someone I once shared a life with. In the midst of this, something beautiful happened. I proposed to Sarah. It was nothing fancy, just us and a sunset. But when she said yes, it felt like a new chapter opening. We started planning a small wedding, nothing like the extravagant affair I had with Julia. This time, it was about us, about the simplicity of our love. But Julia, she wasn't done yet. She tried to stir up trouble, spreading rumors, trying to drag my name through the mud again. But it didn't stick. People had seen through her, and my reputation was stronger than ever, built on hard work and resilience. Her attempts fell flat, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality, like that chapter of my life was truly closing. Life's a journey of ups and downs, and I'd seen my fair share of both. But that day, the day Sarah and I got married, was definitely one of the UPS. It was a modest affair, just close friends and family, but it was perfect. The local media caught wind of it and gave us a little shout out. Positive stuff, eh? Local businessman finds love again, kind of story. It felt good, not gonna lie. The kids were beaming, Sarah was radiant, and me? I was probably the happiest guy on the planet. Meanwhile, Julia was on a different path. I heard from mutual friends that she was doing some soul searching, finally coming to grips with the havoc she'd wreaked. I guess solitude does that to you, makes you reflect on your life, your choices. I can't say I didn't feel a twinge of something. Not quite sympathy, but something close. We'd shared a life, after all. But that chapter was closed, and I had turned the page. Sarah and I went on our honeymoon, a cozy little getaway. We celebrated not just our marriage, but everything we'd overcome to be together. There were moments during those quiet evenings, watching the sunset, when I'd think about the roller coaster my life had been. From the depths of despair to finding love and happiness again, it was surreal. Sarah, with her unwavering support and love, had been my rock through it all. Back in town, Julia was reaching out to old friends, trying to mend fences. But it wasn't going well. Too many bridges had been burned, too many words had been said. It's tough, watching someone who was once a vital part of your world become an outcast. But we reap what we sow, and Julia was learning that the hard way. On the business front, things were booming. We were expanding internationally, breaking into markets I'd only dreamed of a few years back. It was a testament to the hard work and dedication of my team, and to the resilience we'd all shown. We were making waves, and it felt incredible to be leading the charge. It was one of those parent events, and Jack and Lily had to talk about their heroes. To my utter surprise, they both spoke about me, my struggles, my comeback, how I'd always been there for them. Their words, simple yet sincere, struck a chord in me. Amidst all the chaos, I'd managed to be a good dad, and that was worth more than any business success. Julia's descent continued. She was neck-deep in debt, struggling to keep a roof over her head. I heard she'd tried to start a business, write a book, anything to claw her way back. But nothing took off. The book, particularly, was a desperate move. A tell-all about our life, our marriage. But no publisher wanted to touch it. Maybe they saw it for what it was, a last-ditch effort to capitalize on a failed relationship. On my end, things were looking up. I decided to give back, to help others who'd hit rock bottom like I once had. I started a charity foundation focused on rebuilding lives, whether it was through financial aid, counseling, or simply giving a listening ear. It was my way of paying forward the second chance I'd been given. The highlight of this chapter of my life came unexpectedly. A major magazine got wind of my story, the downfall, the comeback, the new family, the charity work. They did a feature on me, calling it an inspiring tale of resilience and redemption. It was surreal, seeing my face on the cover, reading about my journey. I wasn't just a businessman anymore. I was a symbol of hope. As for Julia, she ended up alone. It was a harsh reality that she had to face, the consequences of her choices, the fallout of her actions. It was a sad end to a story that had started with so much promise. But that's the thing about life. It goes on, with or without you. If you found this story compelling, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories and personal growth tips. Your support means the world to me and helps keep this channel going. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I've got a jaw-dropping story that you won't believe. My wife came home from work late one night, in tears, and refused to admit her affair with a friend. What happened next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned to hear the full story. My wife, 26 female, and I, 28 male, were married for 10 days, in a relationship for 4 years. It was at this point that she started acting guilty and closed off. We had just returned home from our honeymoon, and she'd been back to work as a bartender for 3 nights. When she came home from work that night, she was later than normal, and I could tell something was off. She got into the shower first, even though it was 3 a.m. She wore more clothes to bed than usual, and laid curled up on the edge instead of cuddling close like she usually did. My wife and I became each other's best friend. Since COVID, we had grown as a couple and as individuals. We had to work through arguments, disagreements, bad moods, and hopelessness. We watched a lot of informational videos about psychology and relationships together. Sometimes it caused a hot discussion, but my wife actually started to acknowledge that she believed too often that she was right and refused to hear me out on sensitive topics. She always wanted us to be honest with each other, even if it was about us downloading a social media app. We had permission and the ability to check each other's phones. I had a video channel from when I was a teenager, and I honestly forgot about it until 3 years into our relationship. When she discovered this old channel, she freaked out on me. She accused me of lying by omission because I never told her about it. I told her she was overreacting because it was old, and I forgot about it. She did not want to hear that she was overreacting. It's like that's all she heard. The day after we were married, a friend of mine reached out to me regarding a video my wife posted on one of these internet apps. I watched it without telling her, then confronted her about having an account without telling me. She immediately became defensive, saying she only posted videos of our dogs. I tried to tell her that wasn't the point, that she'd been the one to say we should tell each other if we join one of these platforms, because they tend to be toxic and cause problems in relationships. Now was her opportunity to tell me I was the one overreacting. That's when I told her I saw the video and knew that it wasn't of the dogs, it was of her dancing. She was surprised I saw it and knew the truth, but she didn't let that motivate her to take accountability or admit she lied. Instead, she asked me why I had to turn this into a reason to fight, and said she didn't want me to make a big deal out of this, since she didn't make a big deal out of my video channel. I reminded her that was from years ago, and this video of her dancing was made the day after our wedding, behind my back. She apologized to me, but it felt forced, like she was cornered into it. That brings us to 10 days after our wedding, when she came home late from work at the bar and showered before laying curled up on the edge of the bed. The bed started shaking a little. It felt like she was stifling her sobs. I sat straight up in bed and asked her if she was okay. She only nodded, trying to cover her face. I turned on the light and stared at her while she cried, expecting her to start talking. She finally admitted she cheated on me, but she didn't say it like that. She said a guy offered to give her a ride home when her car didn't start. She told me she accepted and that he forced himself on her. I freaked out. I started screaming and crying in disbelief. I told her we were going to the police and needed to find this guy. I asked her if she knew him and what he looked like. She hesitated before answering me. Then she said she didn't want to tell the police because he was a friend of hers. I found it hard to control my breathing and I started pacing. It was hard for me to clarify the situation with her because a voice in my head kept telling me that she wanted to sleep with this man. She was only sobbing at first because of the guilt she felt, but she couldn't tell me that because she didn't want to suffer the consequences of cheating. It didn't take long for me to start screaming at her to get out. She didn't want to report this friend of hers for forcing himself on her because she didn't want him to go to jail. I asked her repeatedly if she wanted to have sex with this guy, and she said no. When I asked her to give me her phone, she went silent before asking me why. I said I wanted to check her messages, and she became extremely defensive. She wasn't upset anymore. She was mad at me for refusing to trust her. I reminded her that we had a rule between us, that we could always check the other person's phone, because trust is continuously earned. I told her she seemed like she was lying and trying to avoid consequences, so by letting me check her phone, she proved her innocence. She refused, so I kicked her out. I started shoveling her stuff out onto the sidewalk. I grabbed trash bags and started throwing anything of hers outside, despite her cries for me to stop and listen. She finally snapped out of anger, not remorse, and told me I was right. She did sleep with him, and he was better than I ever was. That right there was the warped woman my wife had become. Her ego started to inflate until she couldn't resist the temptation to find another man. With all the dating apps and throwaway culture we live in, I wasn't really that surprised. I was just extremely disappointed that it happened to me. I loved this girl, and I know she loved me, but she let her ego control her decision making and make her believe she shouldn't have to be held accountable or suffer through any repercussions. After the dust settled, I started my own channel, talking about this crisis and how women today are being told they don't have to compromise, respect, or honor their man. As a matter of fact, many women today foolishly believe they don't need a man or any men at all in life. I became pretty popular, which only made my ex jealous and remorseful. Months after I kicked her out of the apartment, she started begging my forgiveness. She wants to get back with me badly and tells me every day that I was and am the man she's meant to be with. OP, social media, and the internet has helped to spread corruption, immorality, greed, and selfishness. Now it's easy to find support and encouragement to do the wrong thing. People are more than willing to give advice and encouragement to women who justify their own actions, or even completely omit what their part in the downfall of the relationship was. There are women who live their lives in complete denial of their own poor behavior and lack of morals. Don't give away the goods before the relationship and commitment is established. Marriage is meant to be selfless, completely fulfilling, and enjoyable. Love yourself and your spouse. When the individual stops thinking that they deserve more, better, or different, and starts living for their spouse's pleasure and joy, the marriage becomes blissful. Each person has their own love language, and if their partner learns and speaks it and communicates openly with them about their own needs or wants without being demanding, things work out beautifully. Give yourself to your spouse wholeheartedly, because that's what marriage is. Thanks for sharing with us. Now, let's get into our next story for today. My wife, 35 female, and I, 38 male, were married for 11 years. Her father and I worked together for even longer than that, which is how my wife and I met. I went to his house for a work party, and his daughter was there like a prize to be won. When I started talking to her, we hit it off before I knew she was my boss daughter. I stayed late into the night talking with her, until I knew I had to ask her on a date before leaving that night. She accepted. We dated properly, without consummating our relationship until we were both clearly serious about each other. Neither of us were talking to other people. Neither of us had those toxic social media accounts, and our families knew we belonged together. It was a beautiful relationship, and I felt like I was living life to the fullest with my loyal, honorable woman. Our wedding was a huge, wonderful event, and I wasn't nervous at all. I knew how serious she was about me, and I really felt like we were meant to last forever. Fast forward 10 years. Her father was forced to sell his business. He made a considerable amount of money from the sale, and since I was laid off, he gave me a large sum of money. It was enough for my wife and I to live off of for years, so I took my time looking for another job. I actually contemplated retirement or starting my own business from home. After spending all my days at home, I could tell my wife started to get distant and anxious. She wanted to know when I planned on getting out of the house. I asked if there was something she wanted us to do, and she said no. It didn't seem like she wanted to go on a trip with me or get out of the house together. It just seemed like she wanted me to leave for a while. I didn't really get it because we loved each other's company and the house was big enough that for some of the day, we didn't see each other. We each had some alone time, but I also made sure I paid her adequate attention and spoke her love language. One day, I was reading in the living room, and I got a naughty image of my wife airdropped to me from her phone. It made my heart race, but not in a good way. Every bit of this felt wrong, like this picture wasn't intended for me. When she entered the room, I just looked at her and showed her the picture on my phone, waiting to gauge her response. She just smiled and played it off like it was intended to be a pleasant surprise for me. I suggested that next time she come stand in front of me and start stripping. She just smirked and left the room. I made it my personal mission to check her phone at the next opportunity, so while she was cooking and had her back turned, I grabbed it. I found the same picture I saw, except this one was sent to none other than my former best man. The closest friend I had in this world, the man I asked to be in our wedding. I took screenshots of their fruity conversation, which included comments about how I wouldn't leave the house, and they were both desperate to hook up. Again, my whole world came crumbling down within an hour. I threw her phone at a head-level cabinet beside her, smashing it to bits. She screamed, so I rage-screamed. Her eyes were as big as an owl, and she was as still as one too. I told her she cheated on me, and she was speechless. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew she couldn't deny it either. With her standing there, I sent the screenshots to her father and said I wondered how she was going to get through life without me or her daddy to save her. Her face started to crumble until she was a sobbing heap on the floor. I turned off the stove and told her to start packing her stuff because I was filing for divorce. She turned so white, her skin looked slightly green. She begged me for forgiveness, with all the strength she had left. She grabbed my pants, and I pulled away. I told her I didn't deserve this heartbreak and disrespect, and that I wouldn't find it in my next wife, no matter how long she committed to me. Marriage is supposed to be beautiful and blissful, not what she turned ours into. She wailed breathless sobs as I pulled her out onto the porch, surrounded by piles of her belongings. She asked me who was coming to get her, and I said I didn't know. That was up to her to figure out. My former best man was married, so it was just 2 hours later that his wife discovered the truth. He was kicked out, and so my wife actually tried to ask him to come get her from my porch, and he cussed her out before blocking her. It was so dramatic and heartbreaking to experience this. I felt like my life became a horrible reality show that I did not relate to. I suddenly despised the woman I loved for so long. She tried calling her father. As soon as he answered, she sounded like a whiny little girl when she called him daddy and tried to paint me as the monster to blame. He scolded her so loudly that I could hear it from the doorway. She tried to interject, but he wouldn't have it. He told her she did not behave like the lady he and her mother raised her to be, and he couldn't fathom how she had the gall and heartlessness to cheat on me, who he called an honorable, respectable man that didn't deserve this devastation and betrayal. He ended the phone call after telling her he would not be coming to save her from facing the consequences of her actions. It was a friend that my wife barely considered a friend that came to her rescue and said she could stay in her spare bedroom. My wife had always bragged to this woman about how lucky she was to have me in the house we lived in. Her dad was the one paying for her car, so she only kept that until he told her to take over the payments. She couldn't afford them, so he took the car back. My ex had it all until her actions reduced her to nothing. I can only wish her luck recovering from such a stupid and unnecessary decision that changed our lives forever. OP, I am so sorry your wife did this to you. Your marriage started off properly and should have worked out. The problem was that your wife was extremely entitled. She probably believed she was a prize to be won and started to feel bored in her married life with you. It doesn't even mean you miss her husband did anything wrong. Her ego craved attention and flattery from other men, and what better man than one that stood just behind her husband at the altar? Women can be heartless and cruel when it comes to needing their inflated egos stroked. It isn't enough for these women to be selfless and honorable wives. I'm sure a majority of them don't know the meaning of selflessness, accountability, or what an honorable wife would even do or offer her husband. They are sick and obsessed with themselves. I am sorry that you had to go through this experience. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact